And we're here at Droidcon, New York City. I'm very excited to be here with Matt McKenna from Square. How you doing, Matt?
Good, how are you?
Good. And Sam Greenberg from CapitalOne.
Hey.
All right. And today we're talking about accessibility, which is a topic that we talk a lot about on Android Faithful, a lot
Yes.
with our audience. It's an important aspect of development. First off, I guess I'll start with you, Sam. What interests you in the realm of accessibility when it comes to development? Like, share with us what you see as the importance of accessibility.
Well, our talk is about color blindness, mostly because I am partially colorblind.
Okay.
And it doesn't really have like a super detrimental effect, but specifically stuff around like talkback and visual accessibility for the most part is stuff I care about more than usual because I run into problems, every so often.
That was actually one of my questions, was if either of you were actually colorblind, because like my brother-in-law is colorblind, one of my best friends colorblind. I am not. I've got to imagine the challenges for developing for something like that when you don't when you can't experience it firsthand. Are there any tools that help folks who aren't colorblind to develop for colorblindness, or
Specifically that, maybe not anything specific to call out there. I know Google has, and we'll talk about this in our talk, an accessibility scanner, which is actually really useful and a powerful tool. It does way more than like contrast or color related stuff. It tells you all sorts of accessibility things, places to improve.
Excellent.
So that accessibility scanner app, is that something you would recommend developers who don't have color blindness check out if they want to like diagnose their app?
Yeah, I think it's useful for the most part for anybody relative to accessibility purposes. It provides a lot of information, way more than I thought it would, honestly. And at first glance, you gain a lot from just knowing like, oh, hey, here are places I can improve, like this text could look better or something like that.
And where do developers get this app from?
It's Google provided. You can just download it from the App Store. You scroll through and it has like one of those pop-up menus that you can pin to a part of the screen, and then it can take a screenshot or you can record and it'll play it back for you, or you can look at like the still and click on individual components that you can investigate.
Cool. So Matt, share with us your kind of background in this space.
So we used to work together at a company that was really heavily invested into accessibility. Like there were entire labs that were dedicated to this, and that's kind of where we both got some introduction to what's expected from like a full featured app that has to support these things. And from there, it's just been something that's always been on the back of my mind. Good practices get built in early, and then you just always have them. There are tools that do supply some of this color blindness help inside Android Studio. It gives you like an overlay and a grid for a bunch of different previews of your UI that can show you different types of color blindness and how they render on a screen for someone who might be impacted. So we will talk about that in our talk as well, and there's some good examples online.
Very cool.
So I have a quick question. Like after you say diagnose potential issues with color contrast in your apps that might negatively impact users with color blindness, what are some of the challenges associated with actually tweaking your app to make it more accessible? Like, are there any things that you got to look out for in particular when you're making changes, or that make it difficult to actually adjust your app?
I think the first thing would be if it's color choices that impact branding would be the most difficult, because those are pretty hard to get around. But there are strategies to help with that too. Like you can introduce some sort of pattern or some sort of other signifier, like an icon, if things have some sort of meaning behind the color. That's always something that you have to watch out for.
The marketing folks really won't bend to it for accessibility. It's got to be this Pantone, right?
And similarly, as somebody who is partially affected by the colors, I have a lot of conversations with designers to keep things clear for me, especially. So that's, conversations. Branding, that'll probably be really hard to change. But there are certain things you can do, like, does a button really have to be this specific color? Can we change it to something slightly more friendly? And it'll probably just look better in general, like visual clarity purposes.
For sure, yeah. Have you gotten any, I'm curious if you've gotten any direct feedback from users who appreciate the effort, or if you've done user testing or anything like that? Because I know it's one thing to be in the lab working with something, but do you often get to see actual users interact with what you've done and then make adjustments from there?
Yeah, related to what Matt was saying earlier, we spent a lot of time working on accessibility in that app, which is why it's always kind of been planted as an idea in my mind. Everywhere I've been, I kind of keep that, present, the idea that that's something that can be improved or worked on. So yeah, there's definitely feedback there. There's always analytics for things. Yeah. I've personally added analytics for like accessibility stuff, just curiosity to see who uses it. And it's good to know that it is there and being used by people out there. Yeah.
Are there any potential benefits to designing your app with accessibility in mind for users who don't, have issues with color blindness or any visual impairments in general?
Absolutely. So this can actually come back to the invention of the touchscreen itself, because before we had capacitive touchscreens, they were all resistive, and there were users who couldn't actually press hard enough to have the touch register. And so they created an easier way to do that that doesn't really require any pressure. And so that one accessibility invention has now impacted all of our lives. And so whatever happens next, if something's easier to understand, whether it be the way information is organized on a graph or more clear colors, it's going to be simpler just to use overall.
And, since this is Android, there's the F word that, is the ire of many app developers, fragmentation. Does the varying implementations by different Android device makers, the big name Samsung, Oppo, Xiaomi, etc., do any of those differences in how they create their Android operating systems impact your work on making your app, uniform in how they appear for colorblind users on different devices?
Not so much that I've seen personally. I think the main thing that would impact this would be probably the screen quality, because different screens will show colors differently. And that is all still something that we are then perceiving after the fact. It's not how, you could tell this screen to render red, but if the screen actually doesn't render red because that chip's broken or something, you're not going to see anything.
Yeah, the other thing is different implementations of talkback engines and stuff like that. So there's always differences between Google's and Samsung's, stuff like that. Even just the screen's brightness. Your screen doesn't get bright enough and, you're outside, the sun's glaring on it. Certain colors just aren't going to look the way that they should no matter what, even if it is displaying the same across 3 devices. If the screen isn't bright enough, then you're not going to see it anyway.
Is there any element within Android that you wish Google would adjust to help support this better? Or, if you had the powers of the Goog behind you, what would you do?
Yeah, so there is one that we'll talk about. There is actually built-in color correction in Android. Yeah. And in Android 15, they'll actually be introducing a slider for it. Right now, it's only on-off, which frankly is basically useless for someone like me. It's mild, so what it changes is pretty radical. The whole thing, everything I look at on the screen is different, which isn't as useful as if I could just tune it up a little bit. So stuff like that, kind of all things color related in the vein of things, having more granular control over being able to change what color palettes you see. Maybe colorblind settings in apps, or a default forced, hey, every color should change to this level of contrast, which I know would be really hard just looking into it as we have.
And just to interject for a little bit, that color correction intensity slider that you just mentioned, I didn't bring it up on last week's episode, but that's something that's actually now enabled or available in the latest Android 15 QPR1 Beta 2 release. So Android 16 for all other devices except for Pixel.
Yeah. Our talk that we're giving started because we were discussing that color correction feature, because I had discovered it and was messing around with it, knew Sam dealt with this, and then we just had an hour-long conversation about is this actually useful for you? And then we went through a bunch of different apps and tried it, and it actually more simulates what the experience is going to be for someone who is impacted by a certain type of color blindness than adjusting the colors in a way that makes it more comfortable for those people. And I'm not sure that this intensity slider is going to help all that much either, because it blends the colors similar to as if you had color blindness versus providing more separation between the wavelengths. So that's, we're going to call that out on our talk, but that's what we would absolutely change.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, excellent. Well, so folks where can folks see your work out there in the world of apps? Right?
Me personally, I have a personal project sitting in the wings. I haven't touched it in a while.
Yeah.
I have local changes for compose and stuff, but basically nowhere for now.
But you do work for CapitalOne, and you're helping them with their.
So I work on the Android app for CapitalOne. So if you use some of the features there, I'd probably touch some of them, and hopefully I'll be contributing to the UI team's efforts as well. So all the components you see there.
Excellent. And Matt?
I'm random places online. Usually go by Hi Matt M on various things. Still trying to find my social landing place after Twitter imploded. So
Aren't we all, right? Yeah. I seem to have settled on Instagram for whatever, for better or for worse.
Hey, it's a good spot. But reach out wherever.
And you're at Square, right?
Yes.
And so we can see the fruit of your labor through Square's various Android apps. And
So working there mostly on performance sort of things at the moment, so nothing too visual.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time, guys, and enjoy the rest of your Droidcon. Good luck with your talk.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for having us.